Yes. So we're talking about the waking up of the Vyavarika Jiva. And what does he do when he wakes up? Brahmaikyam. So Brahma Aikyam Paramarthikam Pratyeti. Pratyeti, he recognizes. What does he recognize? What does he see? So this Pratyeti has to be understood as understands, recognizes, understands. It is not a physical recognition, it's an intellectual understanding of what? Brahma Aikyam, of my oneness, of his own oneness with Brahman. That the Vyavarika Jiva is no different from Brahma. So Brahman, Brahma Aikyam, Paramarthikam. Whenever you say Paramarthikam, it means Brahman only. And therefore, this Vyavaharika Jiva was woken up from his Vyavaharika dream. He recognizes that he is none other than Brahman. And na anyate vikshate, he says. If you look at the second line, na anyat vikshate. So na anyat vikshate. So anyat here means the other two jivas, the other ones. Anya means others. And there are three jivas. We are talking about the person who has recognized himself as Paramarthika Jiva. So the Anyat here means other two Jivas. The Anyat Vikshate. The Pratibhasika Jiva and the Vyavaharika Jiva, he does not invoke these. And in fact, you have to say that when you say Pratibhasika Jiva, you have to say Pratibhasika Jagat. And when you say Vyavaharika Jiva, you have to say Vyavaharika Jagat. So there are four entities. The Pratibhasika Jiva, Pratibhasika Jagat, the Vyavaharika Jiva and Vyavaharika Jagat. So even though he is in Vyavaharika, he is transacting in Vyavaharika, he constantly remembers that all this is Mithya. He remembers that he is the Paramarthika Vastu, the Brahma Aikyam he remembers, the oneness with Brahman he remembers. And he knows that the other two, Anyat, other two are what? Vyavaharika Jiva and the Pratibhasika Jiva, which includes, the moment you say Vyavaharika Jiva, you're including Vyavaharika Jagat. And the moment you say Pratibhasika Jiva, you're including Pratibhasika Jagat. He knows that Anrit Atmana, tu Anrit Atmana. But he knows, tu is but, he knows that Anrit, they are all Mithya, they are all false. So he understands that only the Brahma Aikyam is Satyam and the Vyavaharika and the Pratibhasika, they are both Mithya. This he understands. In short, that is the meaning. Now we look at the next verse, which is verse number 43, and we'll chant. Madhurya Dravashaityani
Madhurya Dravashaityani
Madhurya Dravashaityani
Madhurya Dravashaityani
Neeradharmastarangakaihi
Neeradharmastarangakaiः
Anugamyata tannishte
Anugamyatha tanishte
Anugamyatha tannishte
Anugamyatha tanishte
Enepyunugata yatha
Enepyanugata yatha
Enepyanugata yatha.
Enepyanugata yatha.
So these are all words which you may not have heard before, and that is why the difficulty. So he says, he's talking about when he realizes that the Vyavaharika Jiva and the Pratibhasika Jiva, they are Mithya, he also realizes that he is the Paramarthika Satyam. So he has to say that everything in Vyavaharika is Mithya. And why is that? Because Vyavaharika and Paramarthika and Pratibhasika, they are all dependent entities. And only the Paramarthika Jiva. Now, actually, when you say Paramarthika Jiva, it's only for the purpose of this particular discussion that we are using the word Jiva in connection with Paramarthika. Paramarthika basically means OC. OC is original consciousness. Okay. Or sometimes called Sakshi. This Sakshi alone enjoys Satchit Ananda. Okay. The point is when you sometimes use the word Sakshi and sometimes you use the word witness, what is the difference between Sakshi and knower? We say Sakshi witnesses everything, right? So if you have to say that, you have to draw a fine line of distinction between Sakshi and Pramatha, between the OC and the knower. What would be the distinguishing factor? When would you use the word Sakshi, and when would you use the word Jnata, knower, or Pramatha?
With OC, there is no experience, but with Sakshi, I would say there is an experience. There is an experience. Sakshi is kind of experience.
Okay. Anybody else?
There's a reflection. Sakshi.
Shweta, your voice is very low. You have to adjust your mic.
Sorry, sir. I have a problem. I can't speak. I'm sorry.
Okay, it's fine. No problem. All right. Anybody?
Raviji,
Sakshi.
knower is RC,
Mm-hmm.
Sakshi is OC.
Yes, agreed. But what is the critical difference? You're talking in terms of Drg
Sakshi
Drsya
is the
Viveka,
one.
right? Yes, Vaishnavi?
Sakshi is the one, the entity which lends the consciousness to the pramata, to the knower, to the, let's say, Vyavaharika Jiva.
Yeah, but in terms of this particular text, we talked about pairs, right? We talked about the Indriyas and the objects. We talked about the mind and the Indriyas. And we talked about Sakshi and the mind. Okay. If you remember the first 2, 3 verses. So whenever, no, in terms of Drg Drsya Viveka, what you are basically saying is that the seer is different from the seen. The observer is different from the observed. That is the very, essence of all the verses that we have been through. So what is the observed? When you say Jnata, remember that who is the observer in Jnata? The knower. When you say knower, who is the observer? Correctly, Arvind said RC, but who is the observer there?
The mind.
Sakshi. The mind.
The mind. And therefore, in the observed objects, when you include the world as all the observed objects, as all the drik, all the drishyam, when the observed object is the world and the drik is the mind, when there is the mind, which is the seer or the knower, then it is called Gyata. But when the mind is also included in the drishyam, in the objects, when you include the mind, then it becomes the Sakshi. That distinction you have to remember. Sakshi is when the mind also is Drishyam. Gyata is when mind is Drik. Everything else is Drishyam. Once you remember that, the rest of it will make sense. Right? So here he says, this fellow says that the Paramarthika Jiva alone is Satyam because this Sakshi alone enjoys Satchit Ananda. Satchit Ananda is the
Raviji.
Yeah.
So the mind, um,
Yes, please go ahead.
the Sakshi Vritti is also because of the mind, right? Once we use mind also as a part of the world.
And the moment mind is in the subject part, there are always subject and object. So moment you put mind also in subject part, you are talking about pramata. You are talking about
Knower.
RC.
Knower.
RC is the knower.
Correct.
Moment you say RC, you have included the mind in the knower, in the subject part of it, not in the object part. But
Correct.
when you delegate, you say that, okay, fine, the mind is also being seen. Means the mind becomes Drishyam, mind becomes an object. Then it is Sakshi. That's
But
why it's
that,
called Sakshi, the witness. It doesn't know anything.
Raviji, my question is that thought also exists because of the mind only. Even if we,
If there is a thought existing, we are talking about RC. At the Sakshi stage, there are no thoughts. But if you are trying to say that the mind knows that Sakshi has no thoughts, that statement is correct. Any knowing can take place only in the mind. And in the mind, you have to know. That's why we keep on saying intellectual understanding. Only in the mind you can know that what is the nature of the Sakshi. Sakshi having no mind, it can have no activity, including thinking.
Om sir. So
Yes, Vedanta.
I would. Sorry, I have network problem and some microphone problems. Please
Yeah,
let
yeah.
me know. But
Go
this
ahead.
is
Yeah.
important. Yeah. So in the sense, if in the mind, if Sakshi is not present or there's no connection between Sakshi and mind, then the mind is living in the illusion of the world.
No, if there is no connection between Sakshi and mind is dead.
Ye-
It has no life. Mind is matter, jada. If you wanted to
yes.
function in the normal function of thinking, then mind has to be connected to Sakshi.
Yes.
This is the most critical part of Vedanta. Understanding, even long-term students find it difficult. What is Sakshi and what is mind? Sakshi is simply pure consciousness.
Yes.
But the fact that it is pure consciousness can be understood only by the RC. OC can never say it is the OC. Only the RC can say, yes, there is an OC and I am the reflection of that OC. That understanding needs to be clear. Arvind?
Raviji, yeah, I didn't clearly understand. So I'll just tell what I understood. So if mind is the subject and the world is the object, that
Yes.
is
Yeah.
knower, jnata.
Pramata, whatever. Yes. Arvind?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Yeah, my question is if the mind is a subject and the world is the object,
Yeah,
that is RC, Jnata, knower.
correct.
But if the the mind is also the world,
Yeah, part of the world. Yes.
part of the world, then
Then it is
who is the
Sakshi.
subject? Sakshi is the subject.
Sakshi is the subject.
But Sakshi is Akarta.
It's a Akarta subject. It does nothing. It cannot think, it cannot. So when you say Sakshi, that's why I keep saying that term Sakshi, the witness, can be used in two senses. One is a person who is seeing. Okay. So don't use it when you use Sakshi, the term, don't use it in the sense in Vedanta. You are not using it in terms of the person who is seeing. You are using it in terms of the person who is present and doing nothing. He was just a witness. Say, you are not doing any activity. So as Vaishnavi said earlier, the function of the Sakshi is to lend consciousness. That is all. It doesn't do anything beyond that. And that lending also, when you use the term lend also, it is to be carefully understood, because lend is a verb and the verb implies kriya, action, but that is not there.
Correct. That was my doubt.
So that lending itself has to be understood as in the sannidhi matrena, in the presence of. Just like the fan begins to turn in the presence of electricity.
Right.
So that sakshi is sannidhi matrena. That's a term used in Shastram. Only in the presence of that, other things function. The right analogy is catalyst in a chemical reaction. Catalyst does nothing, but without the catalyst, the reaction won't take place.
Right. That witnessing is not a karma. That is the
Witnessing is
confusion I
he is not doing anything, just hanging around. That's witnessing.
Right.
It cannot be used. That is why when this lending term is used, you have to be very careful. Because lending implies that you are actually doing something, some activity is being happening. That is not there. Sakshi is akarta. Okay.
Sir,
So then,
one
yes,
more.
please go ahead.
Yes, sir. Sir, sir, when from a parimarthik level, for a jnani, he is always in the vyavaharical level also. Like when once you have the paramarthik level as a jnani, he's always also in the vyavaharical level. He can't avoid it until unless he's living in this world. So at that moment, like when when we are in vyavaharical level, we are like we are still reflecting medium, and in paramarthik level also we are reflecting medium. But what is the difference, like from a sakshi and knower perspective?
No, there is no reflecting medium in Paramarthika. The moment you bring RM into the picture, you're talking about RC, that is Vyavaharika. So these terms, these usages, it takes time to understand. So you'll have to, live with it until it actually seeps into your bones, what it actually means. Because we tend to objectify everything. Normally, everybody tends to look, when you say no, when you say I know Brahman, what does it mean? When the terminology the term is used, I know Brahman, or the Jnani knows Brahman. The normal tendency is to use it in the same way that I say that I know the glass. But that is wrong, right? Because in the term, you know the glass, there is you who is the subject, and there is a glass which is the object. But in the sentence, I know Brahman, I is also you, and Brahman is also you. There is no differentiation between subject and object. That's why it takes longer to understand. That's why you cannot teach this thing directly. It has to be always taught through indirect methods. That is what is called sampradaya. How you teach without actually teaching. Because you can't teach directly. Directly means use of pramanam, right? When you're seeing the glass, you're using a pramanam, eyes. When you're hearing a sound, you're using the pramanam, ears.
Yes.
But when you are knowing Brahman, you are not using any pramanam, because no pramanam can grasp Brahman. That is why the indirect method of teaching is there. And to understand that takes quite a bit of time. So people who have been in this class for the last 5 years, yes, I suppose they are beginning to get the hang of it. But others will still need to have patience and struggle with it for some more time.
Om, sir.
Om Sundar.
I think this question arises out of the fact that people who realize self-realized souls, still they continue to live. They have to complete their lifespan, whatever it is. So I think she is questioning that even though they are at the Paramarthika level, still they have to live in this world where they have to do the Vyavarika this thing also, transaction also.
See, one thing which you guys need to know is that does one ever achieve moksha?
No, sir. That several times it has been, which is something already there, we don't achieve.
Exactly. So the point is, that is why one day one of our group asked a question, like, what is the sadhana prescribed in the scriptures for achieving moksha?
Shravanam, you said.
Sorry?
Sadhyam is not at all.
Shravanam.
No, Shravanam Mananam is not for achieving moksha. The moment you say I am achieving moksha,
You are already moksha.
exactly,
You're already
you are already
liberated.
Brahman. There is no question
Yeah.
of becoming Brahman at all. And therefore, once you understand that, all the scriptural studies of no use. Once you understand that I am Brahman, I have always been Brahman, what you study is to make you understand that your thought that I am not Brahman, that is not true. The entire scripture's effort is that trying to remove that thought from your mind that you are not Brahman. That thought is because of your vasanas, because of the way that you've been brought up, where you have lived. And that's why it's a very difficult question to answer, because you being Brahman, what really is there to do? So that's why it takes years. The frame of mind has to settle down, The way we talk when we say, there's nothing to achieve. You can't know Brahman at all. Those will also be explained in a very indirect manner. So when you say, for example, like Shweta said, you're living in Paramarthika. Who is living in Paramarthika?
Brahman.
No. Is there a Brahman which is separate from Paramarthika?
No, they are same actually. Yeah.
So who is living there?
Sir, it is somewhat akin to invention and discovery in the science. So you cannot invent something which is already.
Exactly. You cannot invent gravity, You can only find it out.
You cannot invent gravity.
Yeah, so that kind of stuff, to understand that takes a long time. So of course, it is necessary to go through all this. And sooner or later, somebody tells you that, and when you're ready for it, only will you follow. So the thing is that there is no difference between a Paramarthika Jiva and a Vyavaharika Jiva. Because if the difference was there, it could never be bridged, right? How can you cross over from being finite to infinite? You cannot. That is the whole context of the story. That is what we are saying.
Sorry.
You're saying that when the mind itself can be looked upon as an object, then what is the conclusion? What is the conclusion that you can draw from that statement? It is that whatever happens to the mind, it doesn't affect me, Whether the mind is angry, or whether the mind is sad, or whether the mind is up and down, in grief, does it really touch Brahman at all?
No.
That has to be understood properly.
Sir, thank you, sir. Sir, my question actually arose because of this thought. As a jnani, do I get angry at with people? Like because I know inside that getting angry is affecting me, will affect my health, affect all that. But as a jnani, what a jnani becomes does, and that's why I framed the question in a very different way, because I couldn't understand how to ask.
But the question is not appropriately framed, because you have to say, who is I? When you say, do I get angry? What do you mean by I?
Yes.
What do you mean by I? If you are saying I is the mind, then you are not the jnani.
Yes.
You see the contradiction. The moment you say mind, you are back to anatma. And therefore, a reflected consciousness, you're definitely not jnani. The moment you say I'm jnani, then you have no mind anyway. So where is the question of getting angry?
Yes.
So these are not, trick questions or Zen questions. These are things which you understand over a long. See, ultimately, what happens in the story I'll tell you. At the end of 5 to 7 or 10 years of study, you begin to understand that I am Brahman. That once that conviction is there, then it doesn't matter to you what your mind is like. One day, if you're angry, you're not going to judge yourself on the fact that, oh, I got angry, so I'm not Brahman, or I'm not a Jnani. You're not going to say that, because fact remains that you're Brahman. No amount of ups and downs of the mind will take that away from you. But that conviction has to be there. Yes, yes, I'm Brahman. Once the conviction is done, then you can be shouting or screaming your head off. It doesn't really matter. You're still Brahman.
Exactly, sir. Thank you so much for clarifying, because from the past some time, there are some days where my emotions and whatever is happening around me, it doesn't affect me, and there are some days where anger like overpowers me. Of course, I'm observing, I'm looking at it, I'm completely being like an outsider and checking, okay, but there are times, there are moments when I am with anger, and there are moments when I'm outside anger and looking at it. So I just try to I'm trying to, that's why I have this question, that I'm trying to understand, okay, what is going on.
What is going on where? In the mind, you'd understand. Once you know it's in the mind, you always remind yourself that I am not angry, the mind is angry. See, the mind is angry is never a problem. The problem is that when you take up that and say, I am angry, that is the problem. If you are saying my mind is angry, is it a problem? No. But if you are saying I am angry, then it's a problem. So that you have to resolve that contradiction.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, so with this we'll stop. Any other questions?
Sir, I wanted to say something.
Yes, yes, Sundar, tell me.
It is somewhat akin to invention and discovery in science. So we cannot invent what is already. We cannot invent what is already there. So we can only discover. So similarly, that is why we call it self-realization. It's my thought that came to my mind.
Yeah,
The
you have to
invention
discover
and
that you are
discovery.
always Brahman. That's what you discover.
Brahman.
Yeah.
We don't invent, we don't achieve.
You don't
so which
achieve
is
anything.
already there, we just discover ourselves. With that, we will end this, sir. Thank you so much. It's so.
See, the fact remains that even the discovery is not necessary, because the fact that you are able to discover
Not
is due to
necessary.
consciousness
It is
alone.
at the very lower level, I am saying. The discovery word itself is not very
because
refined.
I am going to discover, right? That is the usage of consciousness. That consciousness is what you are. I am. That is what is required.
Yes.
Okay, so with this we'll stop. Thank you so much. Om Purnamadav Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnam Eva Vashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om Tat Sat. Om Namah Shivaya.
Om Namah Shivaya.
Have a great evening, guys.
Om Namah Shivaya.